Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. A meeting that should have been routine protocol transformed into the epicenter of unprecedented diplomatic tension between the Sahel and the West. Sources close to the presidential palace in Ouagadougou confirmed that last Tuesday, Captain Ibrahim Traoré received an unofficial NATO delegation in a private meeting that quickly escalated into a diplomatic confrontation of historic proportions. But before we begin, to not miss any details, don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications. The meeting, initially scheduled as a routine consultation on regional security, revealed itself to be a coordinated attempt to pressure the Burkinabe leader to reconsider his policies of distancing from Western powers. According to witnesses present in the room, the cordial tone of the first minutes gave way to a tense atmosphere when the military alliance's representative presented what was described as a veiled ultimatum. The captain remained silent for long seconds after hearing the demands, reported a government source who preferred not to be identified. It was then that he began to speak, and what came out of his mouth completely changed the dynamics of the meeting. The NATO delegation, led by General Jacques Beaumont, former commander of operations in Mali, had arrived in Ouagadougou on Monday with an agenda officially focused on dialogue about security cooperation. However, documents obtained by this report reveal that the true objective was to dissuade Traoré from proceeding with the nationalization process of mineral resources and the definitive withdrawal of French military bases. What happened in the meeting room of Kosiam Palace, according to multiple diplomatic sources, was a geopolitics lesson that left the Western delegation without response. Traoré, known for his eloquence and deep knowledge of African history, reportedly began his response with a rhetorical question that set the tone for the confrontation. "Do you really believe we're still in 1960?" the captain allegedly questioned, referring to the year of African independence. Dr. Amadou Sanogo, political analyst at the University of Ouagadougou, considers this phrase the landmark of a new African stance. The captain wasn't just responding to diplomatic pressure. He was redefining the rules of the game. According to convergent reports, Traoré presented specific data about the exploitation of Sahel natural resources, citing leonine contracts signed for decades between Western companies and previous African governments. He had numbers, names, dates. It was impossible to contest, revealed an advisor present at the meeting. The NATO delegation tried to interrupt the presentation several times, arguing about terrorist threats and need for international cooperation. Traoré's response was direct. "The terror we know best is that of poverty imposed by those who promise to protect us." Marie-Claire Dubois, AFP correspondent in Ouagadougou for 15 years, classified the phrase as the moment when the Sahel found its voice. According to her, "I had never witnessed an African leader confront the Western establishment with such precision and firmness." The meeting, which should have lasted 2 hours, extended for more than 4, transforming into a true historical accountability session. Sources from Burkina Faso's Ministry of Foreign Affairs revealed that Traoré presented a detailed dossier on Western military operations in the region, questioning the effectiveness of more than a decade of interventions. "You've been here for 12 years fighting terrorism," the captain reportedly said. "Why then do we have more armed groups today than in 2012? The question, according to witnesses, was followed by an embarrassing silence from the delegation. General Beaumont tried to justify the operations, citing the complexity of the security scenario, but was interrupted by a presentation that Traoré had meticulously prepared. Maps, charts, and declassified documents showed the correlation between Western military presence and increased regional instability. Professor Kwame Asante, international relations specialist at the University of Ghana, considers the episode a watershed moment. Traoré didn't just reject the pressure. He completely reversed the narrative, putting the West on the defensive for the first time in decades of post-colonial relations. The delegation tried to change strategy, offering development packages and economic partnerships. The captain's response was categorical. "We don't negotiate our sovereignty. It's not for sale." European diplomats present in the Burkinabe capital confirmed that urgent messages were sent to Brussels and Washington that same night. Something has fundamentally changed, admitted a French embassy official who preferred not to be identified. The echo of Tuesday's meeting already reverberates throughout the African continent like a seismic wave that shakes the structures of neo-colonial power established for decades. Leaders from Mali, Niger, and other countries in the region have expressed public support for Traoré's position, signaling unprecedented regional coordination in resistance to Western influence and marking what many analysts consider the beginning of a new era in African international relations. On Thursday, following the historic meeting, Colonel Assimi Goïta, Mali's transitional president, published a 4-page official declaration expressing total solidarity with Burkina Faso's sovereign position. The document, released simultaneously in French, English, and Bambara, was not limited to expressing rhetorical support, but announced concrete measures of regional coordination, including the creation of a Sahel Sovereignty Council, with rotating headquarters between Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey. What we witnessed in Ouagadougou was not just the courage of a leader, but the awakening of a continental consciousness, declared Goïta in an exclusive interview with Malian state television. For decades, we accepted being treated as tutor territories. Captain Traoré showed that we can say no and propose viable alternatives. On the same day, General Abdourahmane Tiani, leader of Niger's military junta, convened an emergency cabinet meeting to discuss coordinated strategies for regional independence. The meeting, which lasted 8 hours, resulted in the approval of a 10-year development plan for the 3 countries, focused on industrializing mineral resources, developing indigenous military capabilities, and creating a regional currency independent of the CFA franc. Sources close to the Nigerian government revealed that Tiani personally called Traoré on Thursday night in a conversation that lasted more than 2 hours. The general was impressed by the preparation and firmness demonstrated by the captain, revealed a ministerial advisor who preferred not to be identified. He said he had never seen an African leader so completely disarm Western arrogance. Mamadou Coulibaly, former minister of Côte d'Ivoire and veteran observer of West African politics with 5 decades of diplomatic experience, evaluates that this moment will be remembered as the day Africa said no definitively and articulately. According to Coulibaly, who maintains close contacts with regional leaderships through his network of École Nationale d'Administration de Paris alumni, for the first time in decades, an African leader not only resisted Western pressure, but managed to completely delegitimize the traditional arguments used to justify neo-colonial domination. Coulibaly, who participated in Côte d'Ivoire's independence negotiations in the 1960s and later served as ambassador in Washington and Beijing, establishes a revealing historical comparison. In the 1960s, we achieved political independence, but accepted maintaining economic dependence. In the 1980s, with structural adjustment programs, we lost even the illusion of economic sovereignty. What Traoré did was recover both political sovereignty and African intellectual dignity. The practical repercussions are already being felt on multiple fronts, creating a domino effect that extends far beyond the Sahel's borders. Burkina Faso's government announced on Thursday the acceleration of the review process for all mining contracts with foreign companies, in an operation mobilizing more than 200 legal, economic, and technical specialists from African and Asian universities. The measure directly affects 15 multinational companies operating in the country, including Canadian giants like IAMGOLD and Semafo, French companies like Eramet and Areva, and Australian ones like Endeavour Mining and Perseus Mining. The total value of contracts under review exceeds $45 billion, representing about 70% of Burkina Faso's GDP. The Ministry of Natural Resources, led by economist Dr. Fatou Belem, Harvard-educated but committed to the National Sovereignty Project, released a detailed schedule for contract review, establishing that all concessions must be renegotiated by December 2025. The new rules include minimum 35% participation by the Burkinabe state in all projects, mandatory local processing of at least 60% of production, and compulsory technology transfer to national companies. We're not confiscating properties, explained Dr. Belem in a press conference held on Friday. We're establishing fair conditions for exploiting our resources. Companies that accept the new terms will be welcome. Those that don't can seek other countries to exploit. The declaration caused panic in the Toronto, London, and Paris stock exchanges, with shares of mining companies with Sahel operations losing between 15% and 30% of their value in 2 days. IAMGold, which extracts about 400,000 ounces of gold annually in Burkina Faso, saw its shares plummet 28% in a single trading session. Simultaneously, military cooperation agreements with Russia and China were formalized in a ceremony held at Kosiam Palace on Friday, marking an unprecedented geopolitical reorientation in West Africa's recent history. The agreement with Moscow, negotiated over 3 months through discreet diplomatic channels, provides for training 2,000 Burkinabe military personnel on Russian territory, supplying military equipment worth $500 million, and establishing an officer training center in Ouagadougou. General Viktor Petrov, the Kremlin's special envoy for African affairs, who arrived in Ouagadougou on Thursday to finalize the agreements, declared that Russia recognizes and respects African sovereignty in a way the West never has. Petrov, a veteran of Russian operations in Syria and specialist in South-South military cooperation, emphasized that our agreements don't include political or economic conditionality clauses. We respect the sovereign choices of African peoples. The Russian military package includes Panzer S-1 air defense systems, Mi-35 combat helicopters, Typhoon K armored vehicles, and encrypted military communication equipment. More importantly, it provides for technology transfer for local ammunition production and equipment maintenance, something Western partners always refused. The pact with Beijing, even more ambitious, includes infrastructure investments worth $3 billion distributed over 5 years, construction of a gold refinery capable of processing 80% of national production, and creation of a Sino-Burkinabe Technological Institute for training local technical staff. Li Wei, Chinese Vice Minister of International Cooperation, who participated in the negotiations, explained that the projects follow the Belt and Road Initiative philosophy adapted to African needs. We don't impose models. We adapt our experience to local realities, he declared in an interview with Burkinabe Television. The Technological Institute, with an initial investment of $200 million, will offer courses in mining engineering, metal processing, information technology, and renewable energy, all taught in French and more. NATO, through an official statement released on Friday at 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, limited itself to stating that it maintains constructive dialogue with all African partners, avoiding specific comments about the Ouagadougou meeting. The statement, of only 3 paragraphs, contrasted significantly with the alliance's habitually extensive declarations on African issues, which usually include detailed analyses and specific recommendations. Sources from NATO headquarters in Brussels, who spoke under condition of anonymity, revealed that the official silence masked intense agitation in the organization's corridors. "We've never seen anything like this," admitted a high-ranking official. "We're used to dealing with specific contestations, specific criticisms." But Traoré questioned the entire conceptual structure of our presence in Africa. Analysts interpret the silence as tacit recognition that the intimidation strategy completely failed. NATO has always managed to intimidate African leaders through a combination of economic pressure and veiled threats, explains Dr. Aisha Patel, Africa-West Relations Specialist at the London School of Economics and author of 3 books on neocolonialism. With Traoré, this strategy not only failed, but produced the opposite effect. It consolidated his internal and regional legitimacy. Dr. Patel, who has followed Africa-West relations for 20 years, considers the episode a banding moment for contemporary Africa, referring to the historic 1955 conference that marked the beginning of the non-aligned movement. For the first time since independence, we see an African leader capable of articulating a credible alternative to the neo-colonial system, she analyzes. The impact on Burkinabe public opinion was immediate and massive, exceeding all expectations of local political analysts. A poll conducted by the Ouagadougou Public Opinion Institute, directed by respected sociologist Dr. Boukari Ouedraogo, released on the Sunday following the meeting, showed that 87% of the population approved Traoré's stance before the Western delegation. Even more significant, 72% of respondents declared themselves very proud of the president's response, a level of approval unprecedented in the country's recent political history. The survey, conducted with 2,500 respondents in all 13 regions of the country, revealed surprising data about popular perception of international relations. When asked about which country they considered the best partner for Burkina Faso's development, 34% cited China, 28% Russia, 15% African countries, and only 8% mentioned France. The United States received 6% of mentions, while 9% declared themselves undecided. These numbers represent a revolution in Burkinabe popular consciousness, commented Dr. Ouedraogo. For the first time in our history, the population majoritarily rejects Western tutelage and embraces alternatives. This isn't just a political phenomenon. It's a civilizational transformation. Spontaneous support. Demonstrations occurred in all major cities of Burkina Faso during the weekend, in a demonstration of national unity rarely seen in the country. In Ouagadougou, about 50,000 people gathered at Place de la Nation, singing patriotic hymns and carrying signs with phrases attributed to Traoré during the meeting. "The terror we know is that of imposed poverty" became a popular slogan, reproduced on T-shirts, murals throughout the capital, and even tattoos among university students. In Bobo Dioulasso, the country's second-largest city, a march of 30,000 people went through the main avenues carrying national flags and singing in More Dioula and French. The most repeated refrain was Burkina Libre, Burkina Debaut, Free Burkina, Burkina Standing, in clear reference to Thomas Sankar's legacy. Abdoulaye Tiendrebiago, philosophy student at the University of Ouagadougou and one of the spontaneous organizers of the demonstrations, explained the phenomenon. "For the first time, we have a leader who speaks our language, who knows our history, who isn't afraid to face those who have oppressed us for centuries. Traoré isn't just governing, he's teaching us to have dignity." For the young 35-year-old captain, who assumed power in September 2022 promising true independence, the confrontation with the Western delegation represents the consolidation of a political project that transcends Burkina Faso's borders. "We're not just building a free country. We're showing that it's possible," he declared in a speech to the nation on Friday, transmitted simultaneously by radio, television, and social media. The speech, lasting 25 minutes, was watched by more than 3 million people, practically half the country's adult population, and retransmitted by broadcasters from dozens of African countries. Traoré detailed the arguments presented to the NATO delegation, citing specific data about economic exploitation and failure of Western military policies. "They came here thinking they would find another African puppet willing to sell his people's dignity. They found a country that learned to say no." The speech included passages that became instantly iconic. "Sovereignty isn't a concession one asks for, it's a right one exercises. Dignity isn't a favor one receives, it's a value one conquers. Independence isn't a word one repeats, it's a reality one builds." The international repercussion of the confrontation quickly exceeded African borders, reaching global proportions through social media and alternative media. Communication outlets in Arab, Asian, and Latin American countries extensively reproduced excerpts from Traoré's presentation, presenting him as a symbol of resistance to Western neocolonialism. Al Jazeera dedicated a 1-hour special program to the episode, while China Global Television Network, CGN, produced a 30-minute documentary about the new African spirit. Hashtags like #TraResistance, #AfricaDespierta, #Soberania Africana, and #Burkina Libre reached global Twitter trending topics for 3 consecutive days, generating more than 2 million posts in 47 languages. Memes celebrating Traoré's phrases went viral on platforms like TikTok and Instagram, especially among youth from Global South countries. The academic impact was equally notable. Universities from various countries invited the Burkinabe president for conferences and seminars on new multipolar world order. Beijing University offered an honorary chair in African Studies, while Moscow University proposed creating a research center on national sovereignty in the 21st century, in partnership with Burkinabe institutions. The University of Sao Paulo announced the creation of an Ibrahim Traoré Scholarship for African researchers, while the University of Tehran inaugurated an academic exchange program focused on contemporary anti-colonial resistance. Even European institutions reacted. The Sorbonne University proposed a seminar on new paradigms in North-South relations, while the London School of Economics announced a conference on the future of Africa-Europe relations. Dr. James Morrison, Professor Emeritus of International Relations at Oxford and author of 15 books on Africa, declared that the Ouagadougou confrontation marks the end of the post-colonial era and the beginning of something completely new. Morrison, who advised British governments for 3 decades, admits that the Western establishment wasn't prepared to face African leaders with this intellectual sophistication and political determination. The meeting that should have silenced Traoré transformed into the platform that amplified his voice throughout the continent and beyond. Meanwhile, in Western capitals, strategists reviewed decades of African policies, confronted with an uncomfortable reality: a new generation of African leaders who no longer accept the rules of the colonial game. Confidential reports circulating in Washington and Paris, according to high-level diplomatic sources, recognize that the traditional model of relationship with African leaderships needs to be completely rethought. A 47-page document prepared by the U.S. State Department's policy planning staff, obtained by this report, admits that strategies based on intimidation and economic blackmail have lost effectiveness against leaders like Traoré. The report, classified as confidential/no foreign, recommends a fundamental review of American approach to Africa, including recognition of the legitimacy of African sovereign aspirations and development of partnerships based on equality and mutual benefit. This represents a radical conceptual change for a power that traditionally viewed Africa as an area of influence to be maintained through political and economic pressure. Similar documents circulate in the foreign ministries of France, United Kingdom, and Germany, suggesting that Western countries' state departments are developing new engagement strategies to deal with what they call the Traoré phenomenon. A Quai d'Orsay memorandum, leaked to French press, speaks of urgent need to recalibrate relations with Francophone Africa and admits that traditional methods of influence have lost effectiveness. The French document is particularly revealing in recognizing that France can no longer count on submissive African leaderships and needs to accept relations based on sovereignty and equality. For a country that maintained almost absolute control over its former colonies through the Francofrique system, this admission represents a historic strategic defeat. The Africa emerging from this confrontation is no longer the same one that bowed its head before ultimatums. It's a continent that found its voice, and a leader who became a symbol of resistance that resonates far beyond the Sahel's borders. For historians following the evolution of African international relations, the confrontation at Kosiam Palace marks the end of one era and the beginning of another, where African dignity is no longer negotiable. Professor Cheikh Anta Diop Ndiaye, from the University of Dakar and specialist in African political history, considers that we're witnessing the birth of Africa's second independence. According to Ndiaye, the first independence in the 1960s was political and formal. This second independence is intellectual and real. Traoré showed that it's possible to face neo-colonialism with solid arguments and viable alternatives. What happened in that meeting room in Ouagadougou wasn't just a diplomatic confrontation, but the birth of a new continental consciousness, a consciousness that says Africa is no longer for sale. And this consciousness, fed by the example of a young captain who dared to say no, spreads throughout the continent like a flame that no one will be able to extinguish. In the streets of Lagos, Kinshasa, Accra, and Nairobi, young Africans tattoo on their arms the phrase that became a symbol of a generation. The terror we know is that of imposed poverty. In universities in Cairo, Algiers, Casablanca, and Tunis, students debate the Traoré methods of intellectual resistance to neocolonialism. In parliaments in Pretoria, Luanda, Maputo, and Harare, deputies cite the Ouagadougou confrontation as an example of national dignity. The seed planted that Tuesday at Kosiam Palace germinates throughout the continent, promising a harvest that will forever transform relations between Africa and the world. A harvest of dignity, sovereignty, and, finally, true independence. If this analysis made you think differently about power, sovereignty, and leadership in the 21st century, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video. Traoré's story is just beginning, and you need to follow every move of this silent revolution that's changing the world. See you in the next episode.